Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Stacy Falvey and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Lake City Public Library. And tonight's Zoom event is led by Scott Mehus, Education Director at the National Eagle Center in Wabasha. He is also co-director of the Golden Eagle Project, a partnership studying wintering golden eagles in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Scott holds degrees in both environmental interpretation and recreation and leisure studies, and is passionate about the natural world and enjoys sharing his knowledge. We are so grateful that he is sharing his expertise with us tonight. Before I turn it over to Scott, just a couple of things that we'd ask is, first of all, if you could please hold your questions until the very end. We will definitely have time for any questions that you may have, but if you could hold those until the end. And also, if you could keep yourself muted throughout the event, it just is less distracting for those of us that are watching tonight. This is also being recorded, so if you would like to rewatch at any time, or if you know of anyone who has missed it, I will be posting the recording on our Facebook page and our website again for people to rewatch or watch if they would like to. And then also, Scott has put together a very detailed handout with a lot of the information and even more of what he's covering tonight. And so if any of you would like a copy of that, you can use the chat feature at I believe it's at the bottom of some of your screens. It might be at the top of other screens, but you can just send a private chat to me, and I'm Stacy, and just put a note in there with your email address, and I can either email it to you, or if you'd like to pick up a copy at the library, just put a note there just asking for a copy, and then I'll make sure that a copy is set aside for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
All right, thank you, Stacy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight to share a little bit about bird watching and bird feeding in our backyards. I know when Stacy reached out to me a while back about this and said, yeah, I'd love to do something like that. And at first I had all these big plans of talking about feeding and housing and all of this stuff, but it's a lot. It's a lot. And so I decided to whittle it down a little bit more to just kind of the bird feeding aspects and attracting some birds to your backyards and talking about some of the common ones that you might see or the ones that you might want to try to attract. And so we'll kind of get started with that. And as Stacy mentioned, I put together a little handout. I don't think there's no way that I'm gonna be able to cover all of that in our presentation tonight. So please request that. I've got a list of all the things we're going to talk about tonight, but I also have a list in the back of some of the birds that you might expect to see in your backyard, when you might expect to see them, and how abundant or how common they are for our area. So feel free to look at that. And then also I have my email on there. So if you ever have questions about birds, I'd always love to chat with people about birds. If you have a picture, take a picture. Be glad to take a look at that as well. But a little bit first, let's get started about who I am and where I'm from. As I mentioned, I'm the Scott Mehus. I'm the Education Director at the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota. I'm hoping that all of you, or many of you, have at least heard of the National Eagle Center, or maybe even been there. Even though we have that grand old name, National Eagle Center, we are a nonprofit, so we really do rely on our visitors coming and supporting us, visiting us, buying things in the gift store, getting memberships, and so we appreciate those that have been there before. And as it is in so many cases nowadays with the situation with COVID we're in right now, lots of different things going on out there and difficult to survive for some, but we're slowly squeaking by, and so any little bit of support greatly helps. And now I can see the Foss Pizza down there, and I know everybody's gonna be interested in that now. I heard a little bit about it before when we first started. Now I can see it. It looks good. So enjoy the pizza while we talk about birds tonight. So anyway, a little bit more about the center. For those of you who have not been there, we are located right along the mighty Mississippi River in downtown Wabasha. Beautiful building right on Main Street. We moved into that building in 2007. And we take care of several different types of eagles, and we take care of them that have been injured in the wild and cannot survive on their own. And you literally get a nose to beak experience with our birds, plus hands-on displays. Mentioned the bald eagles, definitely we are very abundant with those in this area, but we also have golden eagles that winter in this area. And as Stacy mentioned, I'm part of a research project, golden eagles, that winter here in Minnesota, Wisconsin. And then because we put satellite transmitters on them, these winter here and then migrate into northern parts of Canada, well over 2,000 miles away, up into the Northwest Territories and into Nunavut, just below the Arctic Circle. Those are the birds that winter in our bluffs. Now, they're not along the water because golden eagles don't feed on fish. They're feeding on rabbits and squirrels and birds as big as wild turkeys. So if you want to learn more about golden eagles in Minnesota, come on down to the National Eagle Center to do that. But you can also bring the kids to learn through other exhibits as well. A couple other things. We have some beautiful murals depicting native animals and wildflowers and such throughout the building. Come check that out. Beautiful art galleries as well. And for those of you that have been paying attention to the news, may have heard that we've got some exciting things on the horizon. We recently acquired state bonding money. We're working on some matching grants on that right now. We have plans in the works, literally as we speak, for expansion. Some of that will be on the outside of our building, our current building, to expand our areas for our weathering area. That is an area where our birds spend time in the morning, getting our chance to be outside every day. We're working on updating that. We're also working with the city on updating the docking space along the river in Wabasha to allow some of the large passenger boats and the paddle wheel boats to be able to dock in Wabasha. Right now they dock in Lake City or in Red Wing and then bus on down, and they would like to be able to dock here. So we're working on that. And then we've also been given a huge collection of everything related to eagles. This gentleman here named Preston Cook from California has been collecting everything, and I mean everything related to eagles for the last 50 years. He has behind him there some original works by John James Audubon, very famous paintings, but he also has collected everything else, and he's put all of this together into a book, and he's also donated the collection to the National Eagle Center. And so, as I said before, everything that you can think about relates to eagles, he has it, and we now have it at the Eagle Center, and we need places to display it, and we're going to be doing that on Main Street here in Wabasha. So keep tuned in to what's happening in Wabasha at the National Eagle Center. But tonight, let's talk about birds. My fascination with birds began when I was a young child, and probably the first thing that I remember looking at at my aunt and uncle's house was these little bird cards. They were like baseball cards, but they were with pictures of birds on them. And on the back, there was information about the birds. Some of you may have heard of these. These were given out in Arm & Hammer baking soda. And they'd put a little card in there. And then on the back of the box, it would have an opportunity for you to send off for a whole pack, a series of birds. And my aunts and uncles had some of those in their drawer in the dining room. And I'd like to go over there and look at those. And that's kind of really how I got an interest sparked in birds. And I still collect those cards today. I have well over 500 to 800 of those cards. These were all produced in the late 1800s through the early 1900s. And then my other fascination with birds really became, and it's cool that we're doing a program tonight with the library, was with books. I was a regular avid reader of every book, especially in the nonfiction section in the library. But one book in particular, this one in particular by Charles Flugum, was written by a local man close to where I grew up, over by Albert Lee, Minnesota. And his book was entitled Birding from a Tractor Seat. And it was little essays that he used to put in the local newspaper, the Albert Lee paper, about birds that were in his backyard. And while he was out on the farm working on the fields, and birds that he would see and the different interactions that he was seeing and at the bird feeders, and just how much enjoyment he was getting out of birds, that I thought that I could do something like that and would be interested in that. And that's really led me into the career that I have today. And so books, information that we're exposing to our youngsters at a very young age is very important. I highly encourage you to keep doing that all the time. It can really spark an interest like it did for myself. But you want to learn some more about birds tonight, and we're going to definitely do that. In the world, there are about 9,000 to 10,000 species of birds, 9,000 to 10,000 species of birds in the world. Now, here in North America, we have anywhere from about 1,500 to 2,000 species of birds that may be seen in North America at some point. Now, that's going to include birds that are out on the oceans, but also birds that are in land and prairie and things like that as well. Here in Minnesota, we average about 422 different species or kinds of birds that can be seen somewhere in the state of Minnesota during the year. Now, some of these are year-round residents, like our blue jays and our crows and black-capped chickadees, but some of them are migrants, such as the Baltimore oriole here that spends the summer here, but then winters down into Central and South America, and then migrates here for our summers. And then there are some birds that just get off track, whether it's via storms, migration, things get them mixed up. Sometimes just genetics, something happens, their biological clock gets off and they get off course and they end up here. So about 422 different types of birds here in Minnesota. Now, some people like to keep lists, and I like to keep a bird list all of the birds that I've seen in Minnesota. And right now I've seen about 325, I believe it is, different species of birds in Minnesota. Now I also keep a yard list, birds that I see in my yard. And some of these birds are birds that are coming to the bird feeders, but I'm also watching to the sky and birds that are migrating overhead. And in my yard, and I live in Buffalo City, Wisconsin, near the river, so I can see water birds from my house. So that helps increase my list a little bit. I've seen well over 175 different bird species just from my yard. And so I'm encouraging you, and hopefully that you'll be engaged enough tonight to want to start looking at the bird species that you're seeing in your backyard, and maybe start making a list and start looking them up and learning more about them. Let's get started here. The main thing that I think that I could share with you as far as being able to attract birds to your yard is water, water, water. I can't stress that enough. The best way to attract the birds, and the most simplest way to attract birds to your backyard, is by providing water. All different types of birds eat all different kinds of things, but they all drink water or they all bathe in water. And so it is one of the best ways that you can attract the greatest diversity of bird species to your backyard. Now, it can be fairly simple, from the standard bird baths that you buy in the box stores, or cement statuary ones like from SVJ Designs down by Kellogg. They can be very fancy, but they can also be very simple as well. The main thing to remember when you're providing your water, you want to make sure that you're cleaning that water regularly. Just as you would not want to be drinking out of a dirty glass or old water that's been sitting around and other people have been touching in it, you would want to do the same for your birds in your backyard. So make sure you're providing clean water throughout the year. Another way to attract the birds to that water is by having moving water. Now, sometimes that can be as simple as hanging a bucket over a tree, put a little hole, a pinhole or nail hole on the side of that bucket, and just let the water drip out and drip into that. Or you can buy fountains that will move that water, but water will help attract the birds to the bird bath itself. Now, there are also these really cool solar powered ones now that they're just basically little fans that move water with a solar powered capability. And so you can put that in there and it'll provide a little bit of movement in your bird bath to provide some action that will hopefully lure the birds into it. The other thing that a lot of people don't think about is putting these bird feeders out in the winter time as well. As you can see in this picture here, you'll see an electrical cord coming off that back left side. In there, in that bird bath, I have put a heater that you might put like in a tank that you would on the farm for chickens or for things like that that are looking to have fresh water. And you can purchase these very easily at your feed stores or Walmart, well, Fleet Farms and things like that as well. But try to support your local feed stores as well, and hardware stores. They will have these, and they don't really cost that much to run. It's about like running a light bulb all the time, which really doesn't take all that much energy when you compare of how much joy and interest that you're going to get by bringing birds into that bird bath. The thing to remember, though, is that the birds, for the most part, they know, I think, that they should not be really taking baths in the wintertime when they can be getting frozen feathers and things like that. So rarely do I ever see birds taking baths in the wintertime, but what they are doing is drinking that water. So let's back up. In any of the water that you're putting it out there, some bird baths are just too deep. They are way too deep. and oftentimes they're way too steep along the sides. So I encourage you to put rocks in there or flat pieces of masonry to put in the bottom of that, so those birds have a chance to be able to stand on something and also not completely submerge themselves, because some of the birds that are coming, as you can see here, are fairly small and they would drown literally in that deeper water. So I encourage you to put things in there to keep those birds safe. And like I said, in the wintertime, you don't have to have that much exposed water area, because they're really just coming to drink that water during the winter time. And there you can see lots of different types of birds that will use that. As I mentioned before, here we've got a flicker. This is a type of a woodpecker on the left. The bird on the right is the European starling. Both of these birds you might see, as long as the other, let's go back, we've had, on this one, we had a house sparrow and a couple of goldfinches there. On this particular one, we've got a black-capped chicken in the back. We've got a little red-breasted nuthatch with its back to us. On the right-hand side there, we've got, there we go, I can use this. We've got the American goldfinch there in the winter plumage. So as you can see, lots of different types of birds. They all feed on different things, but they all will come to the water, including some mammals that you might have in your backyard as well, come to take advantage of that water as well. When it comes to feeders now, simple is best. Really keep it simple. And I cannot stress enough to focus on buying higher quality metal or wood feeders. Please, please avoid plastic feeders. They really just don't last. If you've got squirrels in your yard, they're going to find those feeders and they're going to want to get at the seeds, and they are rodents, so they have the teeth to break open those plastic feeders to get at the seed inside. And so try to have as many metal feeders as you can. Also, whenever you can, use squirrel baffles. As you can see in the bottom of this feeder here, there's a pole underneath it attached to the ground. But here we have a baffle to help prevent the squirrels from climbing up and grabbing around. I've also attached a second one on this one to prevent the squirrels from going on there. The benefit of this type of system right here is you've got a baffle down at the bottom that's black, but then this particular thing acts as a baffle, but it also acts as an opportunity for seed to drop down in there, and then some birds will be able to eat on that little space as well. So take a look at that. Now, the other thing, as I mentioned before, keep it simple. The easiest way to feed some birds in your backyard is literally find a sawed off log, a stump. You cut a favorite tree down in your yard, get a piece of that and just smooth that out across the top and just throw some seed out on it every day. It's a really simple way to do it. Doesn't take much. And if it gets broke, you can sand it down and start over. You don't have to go back to the store to buy a new one. And as you can see, lots of different birds are comfortable feeding on a very flat, firm surface like that. Sometimes when we get bird feeders like this that may swing in the wind, then there are some birds that just won't feed on feeders like that. Cardinals, for example, really do not like feeders that move back and forth. They really like to be on a very firm feeder, something flat like this, or on the ground itself, or as in this case here, a female cardinal feeding on a stump. The other real cool thing about a stump feeder like this is that you can create some really cool opportunities for photos. Add some pine needles here to the side, take your picture when the bird lands there. You've got a really nice picture that you could now maybe use for your Christmas card next holiday season. We've got some house finches. Oh, I'll try to remember to say every bird that's on there so that if you're interested in what they are, I'll try to remember to do that. If I forget, I'll warn me somehow, Stacy, maybe. All right, so here we have some house finches. House finches are seed-eating birds as well. Here we've got a tufted titmouse, a little bit more uncommon bird, but once again, coming to a very simple, just a log. Here's a white-breasted nuthatch doing the same thing. Just coming to a feeder such as this oriole is doing here. The other thing, as I mentioned before, metal and wood feeders work out ideal. This particular feeder right here, I bought at a craft fair over 30 years ago. 30 years ago, that feeder I bought at a craft fair made by a local craftsman, just some scrap wood, drilled some holes in it, wrapped some hardware cloth around it, and made a bird feeder out of it. Now you'll see I have lost my original cover. That did mold and rot away. But what I do, I was just creative. I took the top of a pop can and stuck her in the hole, or a pop bottle, stuck her in the hole, and it works just fine after 30 years. And so, as I was saying before, it doesn't have to be anything extravagant, but I do encourage you to think about purchasing it from local craftsmen. The wood stuff and the metal stuff is going to last much longer. Here's that same feeder, a little different angle. There you can see a chickadee. They're getting a peanut from it. And that's what I feed in that feeder is peanuts. Whole peanut, not shelled peanuts, whole peanuts, but because the squirrels really love them and it's very difficult for them to get it here. I will give the squirrels some feeders a chance to feed somewhere else, but not in this area. And that's the other key. If you want to discourage squirrels, feed them in a different area and not right by the house with the birds that you're trying to attract. This is a type of feeder here where this is a weighted balance here, where the birds land on this. And when the birds land on this, if you can adjust it on the sides here, you're going to see this little thing right here that adjusts to these different little contours here. And so if you want to restrict squirrels coming to your bird feeder, or maybe you don't like grackles or red-winged blackbirds, or maybe you even don't like blue jays, although I like blue jays, I really do, but some people don't. They get frustrated. They're eating all my good stuff. Well, if you want to stop that, you can adjust the level of that weight on there to prevent certain birds or certain animals from eating it. And there, once again, it's completely made out of metal. It's a nice opportunity if you can have the ability to be able to see in there to see how much seed you have in here. And so here we've got a house sparrow on the left and a house finch on the right. And in this feeder, we are feeding sunflower chips. We're going to talk more about the different feed in a little bit. Here's another feeder with a black oil sunflower seed, basically just metal mesh. And these are black sunflower seeds that can easily be dispensed by this black-capped chickadee on the left and a house finch there on the right. Another feeder that I probably had made for me by my brother about 20 some years ago, basically just a wood chunk, and then took some holes and drilled in there. And then what you can do is you can take peanut butter, for example, peanut butter and some cornmeal, or peanut butter and some seeds, some sunflower seeds or some peanut parts. The other thing you could also use is when you are frying your hamburger on the stove and you've got fat left over, you could use that fat, but I caution you, don't season that meat first. Cook your hamburger, drain the fat, then season your meat. We don't want to add the salts and things like that, but you can use that fat and mix that as kind of a little paste then that you can stuff into these holes. Now you can also use that same type of mixture, peanut butter and cornmeal and such, to rub onto just right on the tree trunk itself. Or if it's the holiday season, you could take some pine cones and rub that peanut butter on the pine cone. And then you could also roll those pine cones once again in more seed and then hang those on your trees. Provides a festive decoration of your yard. And it's something that the birds will definitely appreciate. As you can see on this feeder here, it's kind of funny, if you notice closely, it originally came with all wooden dowels, but some of the wooden dowels have been chewed off or broken off. So I now have been just putting these screws in there. Now, there is always some concern people have about, well, when it's cold, will that affect the birds' feet? And for the most part, birds have very minimal circulation in their feet. And so that actually means their feet are really close to freezing. And so they're pretty cold. So their feet are not like our warm hands. And so the feet during the winter touching that metal is usually not an issue like it would be for us. And so that's why when you see a bird sitting out on the ice, you're thinking, how is it not freezing its feet? Well, we've got to remember that it has counter circulation, which basically means that the veins are much thinner in their feet and they're much closer together. And so the veins allow the blood to almost freeze. And then because the veins are so close together, it also allows them to slowly work its way back to the heart. If that cold blood would go back to the heart fast, it might shock the heart. But by slowly having it slowly warm up again through those thinner veins, it allows it to get back the heart in the right condition and temperature that it needs to be. All right, another simple way, just taking some old wire, old fence, wrapping it up into a little circle, and then inserting your corn cobs that you might want to use in there. One of the things that I like to do in the fall here in Wabasha, and I think in Lake City they do some of this too, but they like to decorate along the streets there with the corn cobs and the corn stalks and the cobs. And generally what I'll do when they're doing this, I'll just buy some off them and put them up in my yard too, have them out as a decoration. And then at the end of the season, you can take the cobs out like I've done here and put them out so that it's a little more controlled as how many the squirrels can take at one time or the birds can come and get. Or you can just leave it up in your yard all winter long, and the squirrels and the birds will definitely find those out in your yard as well. So kind of a cool way to do that. But here again, just a simple homemade feeder. As I mentioned before, nice flat feeders are really preferred for a lot of birds. Nice sturdy perches like this, cardinals love. They're nice and open. Lots of birds can feed at one time. The only thing with these is that you can't put a lot of food out at one time. But that's what I do, at least at my house, is I go out every day and put some out every morning. And then I kind of know how much they're eating throughout the day. And then I'll match that again the next day. That way you're really not wasting a lot. There's not the chance of spoilage like you might when you have these big hopper feeders that if they get wet, that can cause the feed to spoil or turn rancid. And then that's not good for the birds, and it causes messes for you to clean up. And so simple things like this are really great ways to start. As you can see, simple things like this will attract a variety of birds. The last picture here, we hopefully all recognize the cardinal there. This particular picture, we've got a goldfinch here in the middle. We've got a house finch here. We've got 2 male house finches and 2 female house finches there. Another female house finch there, and then we've got a male house sparrow there on the right. Here we've got a white-breasted nuthatch coming in. Nuthatches are fun. I see some kids out there watching watching tonight. I love nuthatches. They are so fun because they walk up and down tree trunks both ways. They're very aggressive with other birds. They flare themselves up when other birds come near them. And so for their size, they're quite a fighting mite. And so kind of fun to watch the nuthatches come to your feeders. There's another type of feeder, just a little bit different style of a weighted bird feeder as well. Once again, indestructible for the most part and prevents damage from squirrels. You still want to feed the squirrels, that's great, but you don't want to wreck your bird feeders in the process. And so feed them in a different spot in the yard. Sometimes you can just offer stuff on the ground and you might get turkeys, you might get squirrels and things like that. But here in this particular picture, what I wanted to show you is another type of baffle. You can literally just get this type of thing from your hardware store, wrap it around a wooden pole, and that'll help prevent the squirrels from climbing up that particular pole. Now, this was not in my yard. I happened to take it in somebody else's yard, but I thought this one was funny because the squirrels can still easily get to this feeder. You got to be smarter than the squirrels because they can jump a long ways. The squirrel could easily just climb into these trees and jump a couple of feet over to those. So you always want to watch your placement if you're trying to protect from squirrels. Watch for overhanging roofs, overhanging branches that they can jump down to catch the food that they're going after. Here's a type of suet feeder. We're going to talk about suet feeding here in a little bit, but here's just another chance. What I'd like to show you on this, guys, if you do purchase these type of suet cakes, most people take them out of this particular case. I tell people to leave them in. One, it slows down the amount of waste, and it also forces the birds to feed on the side that you want them to be on so that you can see them. If you had both sides open, as I do in this case, but it's a bigger one, then birds can feed on both sides. But if you force them to feed on one side, then you'll have much better looks at the birds that you are attracting to your backyard as you want. And here you can see, this is just taken right out my back window there, looking at a pileated woodpecker coming in to feed on that suet cake. And you can just see how big those pileated woodpeckers are when you get them on something that small and that close to the house. Pileated woodpecker, remember, is the bird that we think about when we think about Woody Woodpecker. Woody Woodpecker, the cartoon, was modeled after the pileated woodpecker. Now, you may hear some people say pileated or pileated, but then again, you hear some people saying tomato and then tomato. So either one is good. Or you can just say really big woodpecker, because that'll fit. This is a little feeder, once again, just a cheap, handmade, it's an old pot, plastic pot. And what I've done is I put whole peanuts in there. As I mentioned earlier, I liked I like my blue jays, then I like to feed them. I love these peanuts. And so what I've done is I've hung that from a branch so that the squirrels can't get to it, but the squirrels can land there and easily get that. And once again, it's easily dumps out. If it gets broke, it's just a pot from last year's season, from the plant season. Also keeping the the bird feeders, excuse me, fairly close to the house. One is a great benefit for you to be able to watch them, but more importantly, when birds are sitting on these feeders and they get scared, let's say a hawk comes around or a loud noise happens in the neighborhood, the birds are they have a flight or fight instinct. And most of the time they're gonna take flight to get away from the danger that's coming towards them. And so they take off rather quickly, just as you do when you get startled and you go back. Well, they're gonna take off rather quickly, and taking off from here and hitting the window is not really gonna hurt them. But if the feeder is 5, 6, 7 feet away from the window, then taking off and hitting the window, they can definitely get hurt. Well, the question is probably, well, why are they hitting the window? Well, one, they're just trying to get away fast. And so sometimes that happens. But more importantly, as you can see in this particular picture here, the reflection, there is a house over here too, and there's trees over here. And so when a bird might be over here and wants to take off quickly, it sees trees over here and it looks like it can fly over there, but we know that's a reflection, but the birds don't recognize that reflection. And so unfortunately they fly quickly, they hit the window, and then they end up on the ground underneath, stunned, unfortunately. Now, what do you do if that happens? Well, first and foremost, I would recommend you go out there and if the bird is just not really moving too fast, you're welcome to get a box, like a small cardboard box, like a shoe box. Put the bird in the box, gently kind of put it in the box, put the cover on, put that out on your step and monitor it for the next 20 minutes or so. Generally, after about 20 minutes or so, that bird will kind of come out of that daze. Imagine getting your lights knocked out. It'll come out of its daze, and most of the time you'll hear it kind of moving around in the box. That means it's ready to go. Sometimes though, they do die. But what happens though is when they're sitting on the ground in that daze for maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes, that is a very good chance for a predator, such as a hawk or a neighborhood feral cat, to come in and eat that easy prey at that point. So by putting it in the box, it gives us an opportunity to protect it. It puts the lights out, allows it to calm down, and hopefully that'll regain consciousness and be able to take off again. And so recommend doing that. If you have windows that birds are regularly flying into because they're thinking they can fly through that, one, putting bird feeders up there can help because that helps provide some visual there. Putting things on your windows, bird decals, holiday decorations, things like that. Birds can see an ultraviolet light, a spectrum of light that we cannot see in. And so there are products out there that have UV embedded into the decals. And so to you, you can kind of see the decal in the window, but to the bird, it's going to stand out like almost like, for us, it's kind of a clearish white, but to the bird, it's almost going to be a dark purple color to the bird. And so it really stands out that there's something there and I should avoid that area. That's really not a path for me to fly through. So it's a good way to help protect birds that way. There's also UV liquid that you can buy, kind of like in a bingo style dauber thing that you can actually draw right on the glass. You can draw a silhouette of like a falcon, because falcons chase after birds. And so if you draw a silhouette of a falcon with pointed wings, the bird may see that and think, oh, there's a falcon there, I'm going to avoid that area. So there are some things like that. With any of the UV stuff though, folks, it only lasts for about 2 to 3 months. Okay, that's its effective life. You need to then replace it after that amount of time. So please remember that. But the paint stuff that I talked about, you can just wipe that off and then let it dry and then redraw that stuff back on there. So that is an option for you. All right, well, let's talk about some of the bird feeds. As I mentioned earlier, black oil sunflower, we saw that in that feeder. That's probably the best food that I could recommend for everybody to take advantage of to feed. It will attract the greatest diversity and variety of seed-eating birds to your backyard. Now, sometimes people are like, well, I really don't like the hulls, the black hull that surrounds the sunflower seed that'll build up underneath the bird feeders, kind of creates a mess. And it can. You do have to keep up with that. You do have to rake that up every once in a while. One, because it can cause fungus and things to grow like that, but it also can be unsightly. So other options for you then, a little bit more expensive though, is to go with the sunflower hearts. So these are the whole kernels that are inside that black, but that black shell has been removed. And so you can buy those. It's a little more expensive, but then it's waste free. You can also get very similar. I know this looks similar here back to back, but here's the hearts. These are the whole seeds. And then here, these are chips. And so these are hearts that have been broken up into smaller pieces. And these are much cheaper to use. And these are small enough that you can use in a lot of the finch style feeders that have the little oblong holes. I'll talk about thistle or Niger seed in a little bit, but that can be very expensive comparatively. And I also find that the Niger seed or the thistle seed really only attracts the goldfinches and not much else. And it does go bad really fast. And so if it's not going quickly in the bird feeder, it will go rotten or rancid. It'll start to smell a little funny and the birds won't touch it anymore. So the sunflower chips are a much cheaper alternative, and the goldfinches like it, the cardinals, the nuthatches, the woodpeckers, pretty much everything else will eat the chips. So another good alternative for you. A lot of people when they think about sunflower seeds, they think about the big gray oil sunflower seeds. A lot of the birds don't eat these. They create much more of a mess. And so I really don't recommend the large gray oil sunflower seed. Mainly stick with the black oil sunflower seed. As I mentioned earlier, whole peanuts. My blue jays love to feed on peanuts. Here is an example of a blue jay coming in to feed on the peanut. Now the fun part, and it's really fun for kids to watch, I know I get a kick out of this, I think you will too, is you have, let's say you have 10 peanuts here in this little feeder. A blue jay will come and it'll pick up one peanut, it'll put it in its mouth, pick it up, and then it'll put it down and it'll pick up another one. Then it'll pick it up, hold its mouth and put it down. It'll do that for 5, 6 of them, and then it'll go back and it'll pick up the heaviest ones. They want the ones that are going to be the most nutrition in them first. And so it's kind of fun to watch them go through and pick out the ones that they want. Then they'll fly away, they'll take those. Now some of those they'll eat. Some of them they're going to hide those whole peanuts. And so you might find, in your boat cover or in your lawn chair, you might find some that the blue jays have hidden, but usually a squirrel or something else will find those hidden ones. But it's kind of fun to watch the blue jays pick those out. Or you can just buy these peanut parts. Now you can buy these in the store, bird feeding stores. Once again, check out your local feed and seed stores. They'll have these. These are peanuts that have been swept up off the floor at the factories or peanuts that were not fit for human consumption. They're still good. They just may have some hair in it or something like that that they couldn't sell to humans. And so those are available for feeding the birds. And so those are a great way to feed peanuts. And blue jays and woodpeckers, chickadees, cardinals, most of those birds all love the peanuts as well. And you can put them in a feeder like this, where here you can see a white-breasted nuthatch has to use its beak to pry that peanut out of the hole. Once again, that's metal, cannot be destroyed by a squirrel, and those will last for years. So they're definitely worth the investment. Mentioned the corn before. There's the squirrels. They do get up on those feeders sometimes too. Here we go, variety of different birds. Here's that mix that I talked about with the finch. So there is some Niger in there. The little black seed in there is the Niger or the thistle, but there's also some other little millet and seeds in here that also some of the small finches will feed on. And this is small enough, folks, that it'll feed in those finch feeders. Another way to feed it is you can buy these mesh bags that you can put it in. Very easy to hang in a tree. And then multiple birds, 8, 10 birds, goldfinches or pine siskins or house finches can all feed on that feeder at one time. This is what I put out in my little feeders like this. I have 3 of those that I have, and this is what I put out every day. You can see there's peanuts definitely in there, the whole shell peanuts. There's some whole corn in there, but there's also cracked corn, and then there's some mixture in there. I do not recommend the standard bird feed seed that you buy at most grocery stores and Walmarts and things like that. Most of that has a lot of filler seed in there that most birds don't eat. It just ends up being on the ground. Other birds come along and push that stuff out to the ground to get at the sunflower seeds or the peanuts or whatever else is in there. So just stop that, buying that, and buy specific mixes. You can go to your local feed and seed and say, hey, I want to feed cardinals and blue jays. What do you have? What kind of mix do you have for that? And they'll do that. Or you can buy these things as I do on my own from the feed stores and make my own mix based on what I know the birds in my yard like and the types of birds that I want to attract to my bird feeding station. Here's a little bit closer view of that mix that I'm offering. I do like to have some of the filler seeds in there because I do want birds like sparrows and things like that that like to feed on that type of feed to have that available to them, but most birds don't eat it. Well, there's a cow. Don't feed cows. I throw that in there to talk about beef or kidney suet. That is probably one of the next best things beside water, and then black oil sunflower seed, then probably peanuts, and then for me it would be the suet. And the suet can come in a couple of different ways. It can come from your local butcher. Go to your local butcher and ask for the kidney suet, and then you can bring it home and cut it up into little chunks, and then they can put into these little wire cages like this, and then hung literally just on a nail on a tree, and woodpeckers and nuthatches and chickadees will come to feed on that suet. And here's what it looks like in one of those suet cages on the tree trunk itself. Here you can see a woodpecker. Here we got a hairy woodpecker coming in. He's grabbed a little piece of suet out of there and is going to take that and take it over to the bark and hammer it away and eat it there. You can also buy pre-made things. There are little squares. I think I showed you earlier, the little squares. Those are mass produced, available across the country. This particular one is a peck and log that's made out of Mondovi, Wisconsin. They're often available in a lot of the local grocery stores. And they're a butcher, and so they're rendering that suet, melting it down, and then they're adding some bird seed to that. But as I mentioned earlier, you can definitely make things like that on your own, taking the fat from your frying and then mixing it with some seed. And then when I buy those little suet cakes, when one of those is done, I will then save that, and then I will stuff that or fill that or form that with peanut butter and suet from the fry pan, and then mix some seeds and make my own little suet cakes as well. Another interesting thing to feed is mealworms. These are frozen or freeze-dried, and those are available. They're a little more expensive, but I like to feed these especially in the summertime when birds such as robins and orioles and bluebirds, well, all the birds, they're all needing a lot of extra protein to feed their babies in their nests. And they will readily come available and take advantage of these grubs, these worms, because that's where they're feeding their young already. And so these are available in the stores. A little more expensive, but kind of fun to feed. I've had bluebirds literally come and pick them out of my hand, that they love them so much. This is one of those things that they will literally fly up to you to get. Let's see. There's that thing I told you about how you can just stuff that with the peanut butter and lard. I also just have some stuff on the ground. I do, as I mentioned, I want the squirrels to be able to feed. I do like the squirrels. I just don't like them hurting my feeders. And so I do feed them on the ground away from all the other birds. And it also allows birds like mourning doves and, as I mentioned earlier, turkeys or whatever you might have in your yard to come and feed on that. Here's a cool, of course, I work at the Eagle Center. Of course, I'd have to have an eagle feeder. Here's a goldfinch feeding. But once again, I bought this. It's made out of wood, and on the front there's some wire mesh. And so this is something that's going to last a long time for me. There's those mourning doves feeding on the ground. Excuse me just a second. I also encourage you to leave dead trees, standing trees in your yard, as long as they will not, fall on your neighbor's house or your house and damage it. But if you have some dead branches that you can leave, it does allow opportunities, yes, for bugs, but that's what a lot of birds eat is bugs. And so by providing that, you can see I've got a red-bellied woodpecker here taking advantage of eating the bugs out of the bark and then getting a food source. And so consider leaving dead branches. I take dead branches and stuff them around near my bird feeders right outside the house. Take dead branches in the fall and just kind of prop them up. And it provides an opportunity for birds to perch on close to your house, especially in areas where you don't have vegetation or you don't want vegetation there all summer long. Dead branches like that provide some habitat for them to perch in. I also encourage you to leave your seed heads from your plants throughout the fall and into the winter. There's insects that'll be overwintering in there. Some of those are beneficial that need a place to overwinter, such as caterpillars and things like that, but also some bugs that may not be beneficial, but more importantly, there's seeds in there in the seed heads that the birds can take advantage of. So consider leaving those seed heads out there for the birds to feed on. All right, well, I've chatted a long time here and I went a little bit more than I wanted to, and maybe you did too, but I wanted to keep going here with a few more birds to show you and then we'll get to some questions. So some of the birds that we might see in our backyards, northern cardinals definitely prefer to feed on something sturdy and like to feed near the ground. And they do like black sunflower seeds. If the only bird you wanted to feed in your backyard and you didn't want to really attract much else, safflower. Safflower is like a hard-shelled sunflower seed that is white. Most birds do not like it because they don't have a beak that is strong enough to break it open. But cardinals have a very thick, strong beak that they can use to break it open. Side story here, I've been working with eagles since 2006, and I've been bit by eagles many times, but I don't have any scars to show you from being bit by an eagle because an eagle's strength is all in its talons. But I do have a scar, and it'll be kind of hard to show you here on the TV, on the screen here, but I do have a scar on my finger that I received about 20 years ago when I was banding birds, putting little aluminum bands on their legs. And I happened to be holding onto a cardinal and it bit me. Let me tell you, I cried and I still have a scar to prove it, but they have a very strong beak that they can break open those safflower seeds. So consider that as a possible attractant for just cardinals. All right, black-capped chickadees, they are fun to watch. They're active. They often come in little groups, little family groups of 4, 5, 6 birds at a time. So it's fun to see them eating a variety of sunflower chips and peanuts, suet, peanut butter, just a variety of things. Indigo buntings we might see in the summertime. There's a bird that might be feeding more on the ground, some of those millets that we talked about that some of the other birds don't like, but here's a bird that would feed on some of those seeds in the spring and summer. Scarlet tanager, a bird that pretty uncommon at bird feeders, but special one when you do get a chance to see a scarlet tanager. Blue jays, we've talked a lot about blue jays today, good way to attract them. I know blue jays get a bad rap because they can be aggressive with other birds around them, but I always think you got to survive. You know, look at me when I go to the buffet. You're gonna push people out of my way. I want some of them potatoes, so I'm gonna be a little aggressive too. I want to eat. Robins, obviously America's favorite here. Once again, one of the best ways to attract robins is a bird bath, regularly coming into bird bath. One of the other ways, if we have robins that are coming in the fall or even in the winter, because they eat a lot of fruit, especially at that time of the year. Now in the summer, they're feeding a lot on worms and things, but they do eat fruit, and especially in the fall and winter. If you don't have fruit trees in your yard that has fruit that stays on, taking some raisins, soaking them in water, and putting them out on a platform, birds like robins will come in for that food source. If you feed grape jelly for orioles, which we're going to talk about in a minute, robins will also feed on the grape jelly and jam as well. And of course, hummingbirds. What a wonderful species to have in your backyard. So fun to see them zipping in and out and chasing little hummingbirds around. And one of the best ways to attract them is just with a hummingbird feeder. You don't have to buy the special red mix stuff. You don't need to add red dye to your stuff. As long as there's some red on the feeder, that's generally enough to attract them. I see Todd there wearing a red shirt. If Todd might be sitting outside in the summertime, might have a hummingbird kind of coming check him out. I've seen that happen with clothes that we've had on the clothesline, little red flowers or red marks in shirts. They'll come and check that out. So they're definitely attracted to that red. What I do in the spring when I want to attract hummingbirds is I've got a couple of red Frisbees that I take and I lay on the ground near my hummingbird feeders, so that hummingbirds that are flying over, migrating over, see these blotches of red. Hopefully they're thinking they're flowers, and they're thinking, oh, look at all that red down there. I want to go feed on that. But then they'll find my hummingbird feeder that I have placed out there for them. You can make this hummingbird nectar on your own. It's basically 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. So generally when I make it, I take 1 cup of sugar and then 4 cups of water. I boil that until the sugar is clear. And then I put some in my feeder, and then the rest I put in my refrigerator and then save it that way. Once again, that should be dumped out every couple of days in milder weather, but almost every day in temperatures above 80 degrees. You should be dumping it more frequently. But just beautiful little marvels there coming in. We'll move through these. Common grackles, that's another bird that we see in the spring and summer. Some people get frustrated with them. They are ones that definitely will sort through the bird seed to get to the choice stuff. And so they definitely can make a mess under bird feeders, so people get frustrated by them, but they got to eat too. Starlings, another bird that also can be kind of a, as my dad used to say, pigs of themselves when they come in to feed on the suet. They just gang up and they're just all over, but kind of fun to watch nonetheless. Occasionally, depending on where you live, you might get mallards or local ducks coming to feed in your backyard on things. Tufted titmouse, chipping sparrows is a bird that we don't see a lot in our bird feeders, but we do see in our yards. Redbellied woodpeckers, another uncommon woodpecker for us to see at our bird feeders. Much more likely to see the red-bellied woodpecker, as you can see here. There's another red-bellied, or the downy woodpecker, or the hairy woodpecker, much more common to come into our suet. And occasionally, this is not a northern cardinal, by the way, that is a pileated woodpecker, so ignore the ignore the top one. There's that pileated on that little suet cake, as I mentioned. This is one that I made myself out of just local stuff that I produced. All right, there's white-breasted nuthatches, and I know I'm running a little long on time here, so I'm just gonna roll through some of these. But crows, sometimes you get crows coming in. I guess when I think about crows coming in, I think about people feeding bread to birds, and that also brings up the ducks that you might see at your local park. Bread, white processed bread, is not good for birds. Probably not all that good for us either, but it's definitely not good for the birds. It can cause deformities in birds, such as ducks that it's fed to regularly. You may have seen some birds at local parks where they have these stiff wings that are sticking out. That can come from a deformity. That deformity can come from bread feeding exclusively. So if you want to feed them, as we see some kids still hanging out, I appreciate the kids still hanging in there, and the adults. If you have the opportunity you want to do that, take some frozen peas and feed those ducks, or whole corn or cracked corn, but don't take the old bread. Throw the old bread in the garbage. Juncos, ground feeding birds that we only see in the wintertime. Northern flicker is a type of woodpecker that does a lot of feeding on the ground and feeds a lot on ants. So we really don't see them feeding a lot at feeders, but I have them at my house every winter. I have a couple that overwinter, and they love to feed on the suet and the peanuts. But as I said earlier, they're one woodpecker that spends a lot of time on the ground feeding on ants. And we're going to round it up with swallows, a bird that we just really can't attract with bird feed because they're bug eaters. But they are definitely birds that are going to be around our yard if we're not using insecticides and trying to get rid of a lot of pests in our yard. If we want to have birds such as these birds coming in to feed on the bugs. And so eastern bluebirds, another one there. I'm going to roll through a couple of these here just because of time. Some of the owls that we might see coming in to feed, and some of the hawks that might be coming in here. I'm going to show you some hawks. Oh, let's go to the orioles here. I mentioned grape jelly earlier, folks. There is some controversy over whether you should feed birds grape jelly or not, and some of it is valid. What I would stress is that buy the type of grape jelly that you're going to feed your family or jam, and then feed that to the birds. Ones that don't have a lot of high fructose corn syrup in it, those are the ones that you want to feed. And it's fun to watch them come in and feed on that. All right, well, with that, I appreciate all of you sitting there so contently tonight. I really do appreciate your time. I know I went over And I know there, there's probably a few yawns out there. I understand. I appreciate that. Maybe there's even some sleeping in the background. I don't know. I can't see everybody, but there's some of you that are still wide-eyed. And so I really appreciate your wide-eyed attention and maybe even some toothy grins there through all of this. But thanks for bearing with me, folks. I hope that I didn't bore you. Oh no, those looks, I get that all the time. But I do hope that you will find the time to come on down to the National Eagle Center and visit us. But more importantly, that you'll find the time to feed the birds in your backyard. And remember, simple is the easiest way to do it. Keep it simple, folks. Easy. It's the best way to do it. And like I said, hopefully when we all get together, we can get out and we do field trips at the National Eagle Center where we'll take you out in the field and show you different types of birds and different habitats. And so encourage you to check that out. I want to thank Willie Hahn and Richard Crossley for the photos, besides the photos that I took and put in there. I couldn't have done that without them. So with that, I want to turn it over to questions. People that have questions, things that I went too fast over or did not cover. Anybody have questions? Let's look at the questions here. Yes, I hear Terry. So Terry, if you want to put yourself there. Go ahead.
I have quite a large feeding station at my home in the country. I get oodles of species like you do. But typically, and I do have predator protection on all of them. But typically about 2 or 3 times a year, I wake up in the morning and everything is destroyed. All the feeders on the ground, everything, and it's raccoons.
Yep.
And what do you do?
Yeah, that's another thing that there again, that's why I prefer metal and wood if I can. I know they still make a mess out of those, but the other thing that besides the raccoons, we also are getting, a few more sightings of bear in the area, definitely more common in the North Woods, but there again, they can be a problem with bird feeders. If you do have problems like that, unfortunately, one of the only ways to really avoid that, besides going with metal or more indestructible things, is to take those feeders down every night, put them in the garage or somewhere safe, and then put them out every day. And then the other thing with that, for a while at least, to hopefully deter those from coming in. And then the other is really to avoid letting a lot of stuff spill on the ground and cleaning some of those ground messes up after the raccoons or whatever they've left have made, so that there isn't a lot of stuff for them to feed on, and hopefully they'll move on to some other locations. The other option then is to go to your hardware store, purchase a have a heart trap, and then trap the raccoon and move it to a new location. Just make sure wherever you're moving it to, they know you're moving it to there. City parks, because they might not want lots of raccoons being dropped off there. So consider that, but that's what I would recommend, Terry. It is a challenge, and you have to be perseverant, but it can be challenging. Good question. I know I didn't fully answer, but that's about the best you can do.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Terry. Anybody else have questions?
Can I ask another one?
Sure, I'd love to.
So I would like to not have sparrows at my feeder, and I haven't, but now in the last 2 months, the sparrows have I've never seen so many at my feeder. So I've heard that you're supposed to throw crack corn or something far away, somewhere else on your yard.
Right.
Is that true?
That's helpful. Let me first point out though. So when you say sparrows, I think you're referring to house sparrows, right?
Yes.
The house sparrows are the sparrows that are fairly common at bird feeders and see them in farmyards and cities. The house sparrow is a species of bird that is not native to North America. It was originally from Europe. It was brought here by the settlers because they wanted something familiar from home. It was brought here and then has spread across the country since that time. Not a lot of natural predators. There are predators that have adapted to feeding on them, but because of that, their numbers have really taken over, and they can be overly abundant and aggressive as well. And so there again, watching what you're feeding. And so there, in those cases, I would recommend no crack corn at all, anywhere near your feeders or in your yard for a season for sure. And then also making sure you're not buying the really cheap bird feed with a lot of fillers in it.
Yeah, I don't.
Millet, Milo, and things like that. A lot of the bird feeds, like I say, you're going to buy at the grocery store or Walmart. That's what's in there. And they do that because they can make money on that. But in reality, it's going to cause you problems by attracting more undesirable species or creating messes under your bird feeders. And so, yes, you can try feeding them in another location, but I would try that for a while. Wean them off of that stuff that they're going to go for, because they really don't like to feed on straight sunflower seeds, whole sunflower seeds, or safflower, or even peanuts, or anything like that. And so hopefully one of your neighbors is still feeding the other stuff, and they'll find that.
Yeah, it's like I pretty much just use black oiled sunflower seeds.
Yeah.
So I don't know why all of a sudden they are taken over.
Here's another option for you. Is, well, yeah, I don't know if that would work. I'm going to take that one back, but yeah, I would, in your case, if that's all you're feeding right now, is then I would probably maybe try in your farthest corner of your yard, if you're in the country, putting out a feeder of just that cheap stuff, and just hopefully the sparrows will focus on that.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Terry. Anybody else? I'd love to answer more if you had them. Hopefully everything else was answered. The question that you came with tonight was already answered. But as I said before, you can start really simple, and yes, you can get real extravagant, and yes, you have to kind of work past sometimes the frustration sometimes, but I get it. I'm frustrated with some of the birds too. For example, like I said, I couldn't get into housing tonight because there just wasn't enough time. But I get very upset with house sparrows because I have purple martins, and I also have bluebird houses. And house sparrows will go in and literally fill houses up with stuff, and then it takes away from those other birds a chance to nest, our local native birds that are in decline. And I've also seen this on numerous times. I'll open up, and I've caught house sparrows in the bluebird houses, pecking holes in the bluebird eggs, and also killing the baby sparrows or the baby martins. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of house. What I want to make sure people realize, though, is when we use that term sparrows, we're talking about house sparrows, but there are a dozen species of sparrows that are native to Minnesota. Some of them we will see at our bird feeders, like the American tree sparrow, that only comes in the wintertime. They summer up in the northern parts of Canada and then come down here for the winter. And they're a native sparrow, and they're very pretty. There's a chipping sparrow, there's song sparrows. In the fall, we have the chances of seeing, and I have these on that list that I gave you, white-crowned sparrows and white-throated sparrows and Harris sparrows, all beautiful sparrows, native sparrows that, I want to attract, but house sparrows, I'm not a fan with. No, and I'm not a fan of the starlings with my martins either, because there again, they will take over the martin gourds as well. So to actively trap and remove them from them, or as soon as they start building a nest in my martin gourd, remove it. So that's the other key to having birds nest in your backyard. You need to be diligent. If you want the species that you're trying to attract, you have to be good landlords for them. And so you need to be able to say, every day I'm going to go out and check. And if there's a messy looking nest in there, it's probably not a bluebird nest. Bluebird nests are very nice and neat and generally just made of grasses and pine needles. But if it's a lot of junk like leaves and grass and cigarette wrappers and everything, those are house sparrows. That you can easily just remove. I take it and I throw it in the trash, or I throw it in the burn pile and burn that. And I do that on a daily basis. And eventually they will give up and they'll move on somewhere else. And then hopefully a bluebird will move in.
I'm a bluebirder. I have a trail I monitor. So don't even start talking to me about wrens.
And well,
Wrens, I've literally seen them destroy the bluebird eggs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very challenging one for me. And here's why: is that wrens are native.
I know.
Yeah, and so it's harder for me to justify being mad at a wren. I can very easily be mad at a house sparrow or a starling, but yeah, the wren's a little bit harder. But in our backyard, the wrens provide wonderful music in our backyard. And, people maybe remember them nesting in shirts on clotheslines and whatever. And so they provide a lot of good memories. But yeah, I do understand what they can do for bluebird houses too. Yeah.
Mhm.
So Scott, would you recommend just forgetting Niger?
Yes. Yep. Completely. I do not have it in my house anymore. I take that back. So this year, I don't know if maybe some of you that are feeding birds noticed that back in early winter, we had quite a few pine siskins move in. Now, pine siskins are a bird smaller than a goldfinch that nest up in Canada. And every once in a while, we get them down here in little influxes of migration. Well, this year we had hundreds of them at different places, and I had probably 50, 60 at a time. And so I did go out and buy some Niger seed then because I had so many birds and I knew that they liked it, and it would literally, they drain a feeder in a day. But now I could have that same feeder out there, and there's not the siskins, the house finch or the American goldfinches. They'll pick at it occasionally, but I see them more at the sunflower chips and the other bird feeders than I do at the strictly Niger or thistle seed. Yeah. So I don't recommend it at all, Todd. Nope. It goes bad way too fast. And once it goes bad, it produces the smell. The birds pick up on that and they won't touch that feeder at all. And that's another thing. I think I mentioned this a little bit briefly, but you got to make sure, yes, we talk about cleaning the bird baths, but it's also important to clean the bird feeders as well. And once again, a solution of about 1 part, that'd be 1 part bleach to 9 parts water can be scrubbed on those, let dry, and then be put back out again. And that'll help kill any fungus and mold growth and things like that in there to do that. But you want to do that fairly frequently because you don't want to come out there and in the bottom of your feeder, there's a junk of about that much of mold and mildew and just goo. One, it's going to be very hard to clean out. But it also has an opportunity to provide spreading disease and things like that to the birds. Yeah.
Scott, there was a question that came in through the chat box. Someone asked, are there birds that we should try to attract to our area? Any types that we want to come to our area?
Yeah, well, I think of birds like when I think of that question, I think about summer birds. And I think back to, because I'm a purple martin landlord, I think about the Native Americans and how the Native Americans were the first ones to attract purple martins to their area, to their camps, by hanging out gourds because they wanted them to be catching the bugs and taking care of the bugs. They were bug control. And so I like to think about birds such as purple martins and swallows, tree swallows, and bluebirds and all those other birds that will eat bugs. That are in our backyards that we're kind of frustrated with and that we sometimes want to put chemicals on, but that's not a good idea. So by putting out houses for birds like martins or swallows and things like that that are feeding on those bugs, that's a bird that I would definitely focus on. But more importantly, find a bird that you really enjoy, whether it's just because it's really colorful like a cardinal or it's loud and boisterous like a blue jay, something that you have a connection with. And then find out that bird seed or feed that they are interested in or housing that they require and focus on that first. And then you can always expand out from there. But it's kind of fun to learn about one particular species and learn all the things that it needs. And then you can start adapting to other species after that.
Okay, and another question just popped in as well. What is a good substitute for peanut butter for those who are severely allergic?
Ooh, yeah. Yep. So that is a good thing. And so there are some other nut butters, but some of those are not good either, right? For some people. And so then I would just strictly avoid that. And I would use the fat, whether it's the fat that you get from your frying and then mixing your seeds in with that to kind of create the base and avoid the peanut butter completely. Or you can use not Crisco, but yeah, good old-fashioned lard that you used to use for cooking, and you still find you can use that as an alternative to mix in with your seed to roll. Like, for example, if you wanted to make pine cone ornaments with some seed on there, instead of using peanut butter as your glue agent, you could use that lard as that opportunity for peanut allergies. Yep.
Okay.
I would say that with bird feeding, and people with peanut allergies, there is a lot of seed mixes that have that opportunity where they're mixing and touching with peanuts. So I would just use a little caution when you're dealing with the seed, maybe wearing gloves or whatever, just to be safe. Because like I say, peanuts are used in a lot of different seed factories and mixes. So there might be some cross-contamination.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thanks from the Fosses. Thanks for the kids hanging out there. They said good bedtime for the kiddos. That's bedtime for me too. Yeah, no. But after that pizza, I'd be ready for bedtime too. Yeah, so we all look forward to maybe having some pizza now tonight because of the Fosses pizza party.
Oh, there's one other question that just came in. Can coconut oil be used?
Yep. Coconut oil can be used as well. The other thing that I think about that's interesting about coconut is one that's used more and more. And then the other thing that's used, and I mentioned in the list, is hemp seed. And that's one that, especially the state of Minnesota, I know is working on getting that as a kind of a regular bird seed availability to people as an option for them. What I was going to say is, when I was a kid, what I used to do is I'd go down to the local grocery store, buy a whole coconut. And then what I would do is I would take a saw and I would cut out an end of it. And then I would, I'd take the meat out. I'd drink the milk or whatever first. And then I would take the meat out. And then I'd make bird feeders out of that. I would take a little screw and screw into the top of it. And then I would put peanuts in there or whatever and hang that in a tree on a wire. It's kind of a cute little bird feeder option. It's homemade and it's good. It's a good craft for kids to help with. They get to learn about coconuts. They get to learn about where they come from, how they grow, and have a really cool project to work on.
Any other questions? Okay, well then, just a reminder, if any of you would like that handout, you can either call the library and leave a message for me, or you could send, one last little message to me in the chat feature with your email address. And then I would just like to say thank you to Scott. This has been great. You've provided us with so much information, and I really, really appreciate that. So thank you for sharing your expertise this evening.
I appreciate that. Thanks for hanging in there. I know it was a lot, and we got through a lot, but we made it. And like I said, when I first started thinking about this, Stacy, I was like, okay, we can do this, we can do that. But you know what? When I started thinking about it, I was like, no, this is going to take enough just right here. So
yeah, no, this is great. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And if you would like further information about any of our programs at the library, just check our Facebook page or our website. We also have information in the graphic. So thank you.
All right.
Good night.